Boku no Pico is an oddly obscure anime, which confuses me, being as it's a great romance under the Shinkai umbrella. The first aspect of Boku no Pico is that the fan service fits the story without feeling ham-fisted and creates interesting character interactions which help invest you in the sadly mediocre story. Well, I say sadly, but it really works quite well, as the show looks to create an enjoyable character study without having to waste time indulging in a boring plot that would have only dragged down the pacing and taken time from the character development. For example, take a look at this scene from episode 1.
あ、もっくんも食べる？
わ、冷て。
ああ、もったいない。
Pico is eating ice cream in Tomatsu's car when Tomatsu begins to undress Pico. The ice cream then falls and is used to symbolize how willing Pico is to give up anything to be with Tomatsu. This scene also helps push both the plot and Pico and Tomatsu's relationship, as this is the first time they've had sex on public grounds. Without this sexy slice of fan service, all symbolism within this scene would have not been possible and would have dragged down the quality of the entire show by a large margin, being as the progressive nature of this transaction affects the characters' relationship throughout the rest of the series. Not to sidetrack too much here, but quick reminder that in Kimi no Nawa, the mass majority of fan service scenes were purely used to provide some eye candy to the viewer without telling us anything about the characters or their relationship, besides that the guy likes boobs. Oh wow, who would have guessed? But I suppose that's what I should expect from such a shit film. In episode 2, we are once again greeted with yet another shining example of great character relationships. Pico meets a boy named Chico, and they begin to become friends. One night, Pico and Chico witness Chico's sister masturbating, and Pico asks Chico if he has ever tried it. Chico says no, and Pico begins to show him the basics. By the end of the episode, Chico has grown because of this, and is now on the same level as Pico when arguing sexual prowess. Though this scene, like the last, is an exploration of relationships, it instead looks at the influences one holds over another when in such relationships, and how that is not inherently bad. It instead shows how this can often be used to help motivate and progress us as people. This creates a relatable and meaningful story, as peer pressure is a big influence in a majority of minors' lives, creating both a sense of nostalgia and subverting the idea as inherently evil. In addition to this, Chico's sister's final acts of masturbating to Pico and Chico help solidify the idea of peer pressure as a useful and necessary part of child development, as it shows that without a foreign influence to push you forward, you will never grow. Keeping in tone with the rest of the series, episode 3 starts with Pico stumbling into yet another victim of his sexual promiscuity, and in homage to episode 1, in which he is the victim of Tomatsu's desires, Pico is now the one looking for a partner. Although, unlike the others of the trilogy, this episode leans somewhat away from the characters and their relationships, and begins to delve more into what sexual promiscuous behavior actually entails, and the effects it has on people still trying to learn and understand sex or the feelings they hold towards one another and their own bodies. This is seen by not only the way Coco and Pico interact, which I will elaborate more on later, but also by the constant comparison to the city. Coco tells Pico and Chico, and therefore the viewer, a vague overview of some sort of energy that runs through nearly all things, and explains loosely how it can create hearts and minds within inanimate objects, therefore instilling in the viewer the same sense of confusion and desire for exploration as the characters feel in parallel to sex. Like the city, sex is a big thing that doesn't really make sense, but as is human nature, the characters desire to understand it. This leads to the characters taking part in what many would consider horrendous acts, but in turn begin to learn things about themselves and each other. For example, through a beautiful portrayal of show, don't tell, Chico has always questioned the idea of beauty, and in many scenes within the show, he is seen wearing much less subtle clothes, and is always working harder to give an impression of beauty. In episode 3, after having sex with Coco, he stands and stares at a beauty ad for a while, before slowly turning away, and then walking off without looking back, symbolizing his realization of what beauty is. This is also shown through Pico's character, who, due to the acts of Tomatsu in the first episode, perceives sex as selfish fulfillment of happiness. This is shown when we see Pico trying and failing to pop a cherry in his mouth, showing that he doesn't yet comprehend sex. This causes him to grow jealous after seeing Coco and Chico having sex, but then comes to realize the value in sex, and that it's not about pleasure, but love, before taking part in the climax of the episode, in which we see the final payoff of all these lessons, as the three have long, passionate sex atop the city center. After watching such an entertaining and fulfilling show, I went to see if others shared my opinion, and this was perhaps a cult classic, but to my surprise, almost everyone was laughing at it or accusing it of being homosexual child pornography. I feel it's because a few judgmental souls were unable to handle just how graphic true love is that this show became such an obscure flop. But, for real, this is a great anime that not only has a lot to say, but also can be just a blast to watch. And that's why I'm here to tell you why you should watch Boku no Pico.